Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, or if you've caught me on the YouTube Sonic Cinema Podcast page. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope this is an informative episode for you. This is going to kind of be somewhat similar to the first episode of the podcast I did back in 2015, just sort of an introductory thing for what I want to do this year as far as the podcast. We're coming into technically our fifth year, even though I only did a couple of episodes in 2015. So this is more our fourth year of the podcast. And for this one, I'm going to be doing something pretty significant. A lot of the same things that you've heard previously as far as interviews and end of the year, 10 best and Oscar discussion. That's going to be discussed. Probably do some interviews throughout the year if a filmmaker presents themselves for one. And obviously, if I go to Dragon Con this year, which I certainly hope I will, I'll be doing something about that. I may also be doing some other things, but nothing is quite yet set in stone with regards to those things, but I'll mention them as they come along. The main thing that's going to be happening on the podcast, though, this year is a lot of individual movie breakdowns. That's going to be the main focus of the podcast this year. In particular, there's going to be one year in particular that is going to be getting noticed, and that is the year 1999. If you're listening to this, there's probably a pretty good chance that you were alive in 1999. If you were, and you were cognizant of the movies being released that year, it's probably one of the most creatively exciting years and one of the most polarizing years in recent movie history, if not all of movie history. There were a lot of technical advances, there were a lot of storytelling advances that came about that year with a handful of magnificent films and very diverse filmmakers making them. This is something that I had the idea for the past summer, and it's an idea that I got really excited about, and I got really terrified about the more and more I started to talk to people about it, because it got up to like 30-some-odd movies we were going to discuss, and that's quite a bit. But I do certainly hope that this is going to be worth your while, and I think it's going to be worth a lot of people's while to listen to myself and not only friends but also filmmakers discuss these films that are of profound significance to them, or just movies that they want to discuss. And it's a pretty diverse list. We're going to be kicking it off in about a week or two with Chris Esper and I. And we're going to be discussing the Milos Forman, Andy Kaufman biopic Man on the Moon. So I hope you check out that one. That's going to be a lot of fun discussing that. I did discuss with Chris. I did have Chris come up with some thoughts on the movies of 1999 beyond Man on the Moon. I think when we did the Francois Truffaut podcast, and here are some more of his thoughts on 1999 in general as a movie year. So as somebody who somebody who's a filmmaker himself, what about that year? What was it about that year? I know for me, as somebody who's wanted to do movies, somebody who's wanted to do film music, that year was really exciting for me to see these films like Fight Club and Being John Malkovich, and even The Matrix, and even Force Awakens and Sixth Sense and stuff like that come out. So what when you think of the 1999 movie year, sort of like what are the types of movies and what do you think of more than anything else?
So it's funny because 1999, I was 10 years old. A lot of the films that year, I didn't see like I didn't see Fight Club that year. Obviously, I didn't see many of the really good films. Like I certainly didn't see American Beauty that
Yeah.
year. But in 1999, of course, I was excited about Bicentennial Man because I was always a Rob Williams fan. I still am. So I was certainly excited about that at 10 years old. I was excited about Toy Story 2. I was excited about, some of the more kid-friendly things that came out then. Like I think like Doug's first movie came out then. So stuff where like I didn't have a critical eye as I do now. So for me that year was more just like seeing films that like I thought I would just enjoy. But I mean, as an adult, I look at films like Eyes Wide Shut. I look at films like American Beauty. I look at some of these really amazing movies of that year, and like you, I see a lot more now than I did at 10 years old.
But I and the thing is, you think about what most of the movies that people remember when it comes to 1999 are Eyes Wide Shut, Fight Club, Magnolia, Being John Malkovich, American Beauty, Sixth Sense, Blair Witch Project, and so many. And The Matrix was another big one. But it's like, so right there, you've got a lot of big filmmakers either making big impressions in their first real breakouts, or at least hitting their stride at the right time. And then you figure you also have, you have Kubrick making his last film. You have Robert Altman made a great film that year called Cookie's Fortune, which is feels like which kind of feels like a something that nobody really remembers, and it's a shame because it's a really good movie. I remember loving that movie at the time, and it's been a while since I've seen it, so I'm curious to see it again. You have David Cronenberg making Existence, which is one of his most fascinating movies. I love one.
Yes.
You have Martin Scorsese making Bring Out the Dead that year, which was his collaboration with Paul Schrader with Nicolas Cage. And you have The Phantom Menace, which, everybody has definite feelings about, good or bad. And
you have Election.
You have Election with Alexander Payne, Office Space, Mike Judge.
Yep.
You had
Austin Powers.
Yeah. Bowfinger by Frank Oz.
Yep. You have some bombs in there like Wild Wild West, and
yeah. And I was so looking forward to Wild Wild West too. I wanted that movie to be good. And oh my God, was it not? Because I liked Barry Levinson Barry Sonnenfeld as a director. Because I really like Get Shorty, I really like Men in Black, and I think by that point I had seen the Addams Family movies, which I really liked.
Yeah.
And so the fact that fell as hard as it did, it's like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Like, he was on such a roll there. And it's a shame to see sort of like what happened after that for him. But, I mean, there are other, there was a Bond movie that year, The World Is Not Enough, which is, sort of like Phantom Menace, where it's like, it's not, definitely not the best the franchise ever was.
Yeah, Then then you have like then you had some of the more fun affair like Mystery Men, The Iron Giant.
There are a lot of phenomenal films that came out in 1999. It's easily one of my favorite years. It's definitely a benchmark year for me as far as my movie watching and the things that I love about movies and a lot of the filmmakers that I love when it comes to movies, and a lot of the ideas when it comes to movies. There are some big titles that I've just really come to love, and from 1999, and it's funny to see what my top 10 list was at the time compared to how I would have it now. And it's definitely a bit of a change. It's definitely a bit of a shock to the system to sort of see what I had now and compared to what I had then. Some of the movies are the same, but the order's not necessarily the same. And a lot of that comes from perspective. A lot of that comes from based on what I've rewatched a lot over the years. And a lot of it just comes from just really living with these films and realizing just how much they mean to me in a very deep way. And one of the things I want to try to do is I actually unearthed some of my early emails to friends when it came to writing about movies. In 1999 was when I really started the Sonic Cinema mailing list, which is still going, and it's a once-a-month thing at the end of the month where you get links to the reviews that I've posted over the past month, as well as a few smaller blurbs and stuff like that based on movies that I've seen on video or streaming or what have you. And that's, if you want to join that, just shoot me an email at the contact page at Sonic Cinema. Hit me up on Twitter or Facebook or what have you, and I'll definitely add you to that. For now, let me play some more audio for one of the other filmmakers that is going to be providing some commentary for one of the movies I'm going to discuss this year. But I asked him about some of his larger feelings about the 1999 movie landscape, and I did this as part of an interview that I did with him last year after watching his latest film, Apocalypsis. And please listen to these thoughts from Eric Leiser on the 1999 movies. What films for you in 1999, as somebody with a strong interest in animation and a strong talent in animation, that was actually kind of a big year for animated films. I mean, you had Toy Story 2, you had Iron Giant, you had Tarzan, you had the South Park movie, which, creatively speaking, not a great animated film, but at the same time a fantastic social commentary as well. And then you had Princess Mononoke, which got a U.S. release in 1999 from Miyazaki. What type of what are some of the films in that year that sort of instilled in you, I guess, a big inspiration as far as movies were concerned?
In 1999?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one. But could you go through the films that you just really quickly you just mentioned besides Princess Mononoke and South Park?
So you had Toy Story 2 that came out.
Oh, it was Iron Giant. Yeah,
Iron Giant and Disney's Tarzan.
Well, for me, Princess Mononoke was the one that drew me into Miyazaki's universe. Mm-hmm. And I was totally blown away and put in that world. I quickly watched Nausicaa after that and started going through, I bought the whole box set, and it just struck me hard. But also, Brad Bird with the Iron Giant, I was really surprised. I was expecting this Disney film.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, this... Actually, I thought, did this guy go to CalArts? And then I looked him up, like, oh, of course he did. And because I felt like it came from... I feel like that's what you're able to do at CalArts. And that's why one of the great things about it is you're taken seriously as an artist, and your film is your art. And then people go and get the big jobs, and a lot of times they go in the character animation into Pixar, or at least they did then.
Yeah,
it was like huge percentage, and so yeah, then their lives kind of changed. And a lot of filmmakers that I saw before, and I've seen them over time, they go and work on these films and they make great work, but I don't see them still making their films. I saw them as like really great filmmakers, and that's the challenge that we all have to fight through. Like, you make your personal film in school or personal films, and then oftentimes it's hard to keep going,
Yeah.
And you have to like pay your bills and go on. So some people are happy doing that, but so there's that aspect. But I feel like with Barber, he like retained it within. Well, he got hired. He made that film, and then he's gone on, and he's a great director. So
yeah,
those two that you mentioned were great. But if I was having a little more time to go through the 1999 films again, because I wasn't sure if we are going to do it in this phone call, I could give you more insightful.
I mean, we can always do more later. And
so Miyazaki is a major influence. I actually saw Princess Mononoke when it came to the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood, across from the Man's Chinese Theater, and he was there.
Oh wow!
It was electrifying, and it was like one of his first times. Really, he was so shy of a lot of publicity in the States, but he was actually there in person for the Q&A, and just blew me away.
Yeah.
I saw him later on do the same thing for Spirited Away, and she's another very strong one.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So going back to my original top 10 list for 1999, this was one that I did in January of 2000, so shortly after the year ended. There were still quite a few films that I hadn't seen yet, but there were a lot of films that I had seen. It's one of the first movie years where I really, as I started to keep track of my movie going year more and more, I found myself keeping track of the movies, and I saw, and this was one of the years where I did see over 100, and it was a pretty impressive feat for me at the time, and it's one I consistently break now. But it's going to be interesting as we go through this calendar year to see just sort of how my feelings about some of these movies have crystallized over the past 20 years. So right now, let me just run down what my top 10 list was for 1999, and then we'll get to one more filmmaker's feelings on the movie year, and then we'll kind of put this to bed, because like I said, this is going to be a short one. So for number 10 at the time, I had Hayao Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, which was the first film of his that I'd seen, and it absolutely blew me away. Number 9, I had The Blair Witch Project. Number 8, I had Robert Altman's Cookie's Fortune. Number 7, I had Frank Darabont's The Green Mile. Number 6, I had David O. Russell's Three Kings. Number 5, I had Spike Jonze Being John Malkovich. Number 4, I had M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense. Number 3, I had South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. Number 2, I had Eyes Wide Shut. And number 1, I had American Beauty, which ended up being the Best Picture winner for 1999. And it's funny because actually that list there are about 4 or 5 films that are only about 2. Actually, there are only about 2 or 3 films on there that are not on my top 10 list now, but there has been quite a bit of movement, and part of it is because of rewatching movies over the years, and part of it is just because, it's been a while since I've revisited some of these movies, and some of them, especially in the case of American Beauty, which my actor friend Timothy Cox and I will be discussing in a few weeks. It's one that I'm really curious how I'm going to feel about because it's been a while, and also because of the way the discussion with regards to Kevin Spacey has changed. I'm curious to see, given the subject matter in that movie, how I feel about it now, knowing what we now know about Kevin Spacey. And that's going to be one of the more interesting things to discuss in terms of what different filmmakers' reputations and stuff like that has changed and how that changes our perception of films. And so that's one of those things I'm most excited about in doing this. I've already seen a few of the films I'm going to discuss. I've gotten notes down. And I'm definitely looking forward to the discussions. So I've got one final clip here from a filmmaker that I've discussed, that I've had share his thoughts on 1999 in the movies, and it is genre filmmaker and a really talented director, Jeremiah Kipp. And so before we finish this session, I do want to give you an opportunity to, if you'd share some of your thoughts on the movie year of 1999 and some of the movies that really impacted you from that year.
Gosh, well, I remember when 99 happened. I made a list of of all the movies that I loved that year, and it was like there were at least 20 movies on the list.
Yeah.
So there was this crazy number of fantastic films. Just off the top of my head, I think Being John. No, maybe I'm wrong about that. I want to say Being John Malkovich, but that could have been later.
No, it was 99.
All right, yeah, good.
Yeah.
I wasn't mistaken. That off the top of my head was a movie that was pretty fascinating. It's kind of like the Jared Janda thing. Who the hell would think of making a movie about being inside of John Malkovich's weird skull?
Yeah.
And then there's an 8.5 floor, in the building or whatever. And then the actors didn't look anything like themselves, like John Cusack and Cameron Diaz.
Yeah.
Didn't look at all like John Cusack or Cameron Diaz. They looked like completely different people. And then it was Spike Jonze, who had done all these brilliant music videos and commercials and things, who really made an announcement to the world. It's this is my voice as a filmmaker, which was truly unique, and a brilliant script by Charlie Kaufman, who was so smart and so able to not just make this a clever idea, but make it really about stuff, about celebrity and relationships and human nature,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that off the top of my head was a movie that I thought that I really cared about.
Mm-hmm. And there. I mean, like you said, I mean, there's at least 20 really fantastic films and really memorable films from that year, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to choose do this year is because of the fact that it's such a rich year, and it's such a rich creative year too. You had Spike Jonze making his debut, you had Brad Bird making his first feature with Iron Giant, you had the Wachowskis with The Matrix, you had Fight Club, you had Magnolia, you had Kubrick making his last film with Eyes Wide Shut, and you've just got so many. You've got so many filmmakers at specific points in their careers, and it's so fascinating to see where they went from there and sort of what got them to that moment. And
absolutely,
and that's one of the things that's so interesting to me about 1999, the year, and part of the reason why I'm doing this.
I think it's a great idea. It is totally one of those years for movies that stands out in my mind.
Yeah.
You know, an unusual number of just great movies that have withstood the test of time, and we can talk about those movies 20 years later, and they hold up remarkably. Like Fight Club, is as powerful a film as it was back then, maybe even more so.
And it's arguably just as relevant as ever, and in some cases completely different ways than it was then. And that's one of the things I'm really interested in talking about with that film.
For sure.
Thank you very much to Chris, Eric, and Jeremiah for sharing their thoughts on 1999. There's going to be a lot more discussion from filmmakers like them and others with regards to specific movies. I'm also going to have some of my friends on as we discuss different movies that came out this year. There are some movies that are still not that have still not been claimed. I'm always up for talking about movies, and there are certain movies that I would love to have somebody to talk about with them. If not, that is what it is, and I'll try to get some thoughts on some of those movies in as we go. But for now, that's it for me for the Sonic Cinema podcast tonight. I hope you enjoyed this little introduction. I hope you enjoy what we have coming up for you on the podcast with discussions on a good portion of movies from the 1999 movie year and a very wide variety of movies from 1999. And hit us up on patreon.com/SonicCinema. Some reviews for some of the movies that we're going to study and discuss are going to be posted there before they get posted on Sonic Cinema. So check those out, and a couple of them have already been posted. For now, though, this is Brian Scuttle, and thank you very much for joining me. And I'll catch you up in a couple weeks with Milos Forman's Man on the Moon, as discussed by myself and Chris Esper. Thank you very much.